Shalom, and welcome to the Days of Old podcast, the show that brings all things to your remembrance. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the Christian slave trade. The Lost Worlds of Africa by James Willard, 1967. The first phase of the modern evangelization of Africa then began about 1500 AD, when the Portuguese set up trading stations around the coast. And mindful of their obligations to the church, nearly always included priests in their expeditions. A report of 1505 describes the method of occupation. Upon landing, the friars set up a cross before which the canticle Te Deum Laudamus was chanted, and when this was completed, the place was given up to plunder. Part of the plunder, in such cases, was invariably a consignment of Negroes who were shipped back to Lisbon, together with other merchandise, and in order to dispose of the prisoners, markets were set up in the Portuguese ports. The first of these, founded at Lisbon with the approval of the Pope in 1537, was the prototype of the European slave market. But objections to the slave trade on the part of the church came later, towards the end of the 18th century. Before this crisis of conscience, the commerce was not confined to laymen. Thus, a Jesuit monastery at Luanda in Angola possessed 12,000 slaves. And when the trade was at its height between Angola and Brazil, nearly 10,000 slaves a year being shipped out of the Portuguese colony. The bishop at Luanda was regularly carried on his episcopal chair to the quayside in order to bless the ships and crews and to exhort the cargo to accept baptism in the Christian religion. As you can see, the church played a huge part in the trade. It says, and I quote, "Nearly always did the church include priests on the expeditions. Upon landing, friars would have a cross set up, upon which God we praise would be chanted, and the raids would begin." Also, it says that a Jesuit monastery in Angola possessed 12,000 slaves. Jesuits are a religious order of clerics or religious leaders. At the height of the trade, Angola and Brazil had nearly 10,000 slaves being shipped out annually out of the Portuguese colonies. The African Slave Trade, a discourse delivered in the city of New Haven, September 9, 1790, by James Donna. In 1481, John II sent 100 artificers, 500 soldiers, and all necessary to build a fort in Guinea. The large kingdoms of Benin and Congo were discovered in 1484, 1485, and the Cape of Good Hope in 1486. The Portuguese built forts and planted colonies in Africa, established a commercial intercourse with the powerful kingdoms, and compelled the petty princes by force of arms to acknowledge themselves vassals. At this period, and by these means, the power and commerce of the Portuguese in Africa were well established. The wholesome decrees of 5 successive Roman pontiffs granted, conveyed, and confirmed to the most faithful king a right to appropriate the kingdoms, goods, and possessions of all infidels wherever to be found, to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery or destroy them from the earth, for the declared purpose of bringing the Lord's sheep into one dominical fold, under one universal pastor,
Succeeding kings of Portugal have not forfeited the large grant by undutifulness to their Holy Father. Portugal long enjoyed the trade to Africa and the East Indies without the interference of any European power. For more than half a century before she exported any Negroes from Africa, she made and held many of them slaves in their native country.
By whom had this commerce been opened, and so long and ardently pursued? The subjects of their most faithful, most Catholic, most Christian, most Protestant majesties, defenders of the faith, and by the citizens of the most republican states, with the sanctions of St. Peter's successor, unprovoked without any pretended injury. These have kindled and kept alive the flame of war through 3/4 of the continent of Africa. That is all the interior, as well as the maritime parts south of the Senegal and Abyssinia. These have taught the Africans to steal, sell, and murder one another.
Again, according to history, we see that those who are the most faithful, most Catholic, most Christian, and most Protestant are the ones responsible for setting the flame of war through 3/4 of the African continent, including the interiors, as well as the maritime parts south of the Senegal and Abyssinia. They are also responsible for teaching the Africans to steal, sell, and murder one another.